Again in studio. This time some charity about some very subtle materials, not only gold, but also sulfur. The sulfur named in British English is actually a simple element. It has the symbol S, but is actually under atomic number 16. It's abundant and multivalent and actually non-metallic. Under usual conditions, sulfur atoms are some sort of molecules. It is also known as a formula S8, which in fact means octasulfur. The octasulfur is a substance within the chemical formula S8. The octasulfur, of course, it's not sulfur. The sulfur have more simple conditions. It become some sort of crystal actually under simple temperature of 20 to 35 degree. To understand sulfur it's not easy, especially if you understand the program of different forms of medicine and how materials could be used. Of course, there are 100 terms that someone can qualify with their ethics to simple Taoism medicine. Also, to understand different forms of sulfur, it's not easy, and different forms of compounds together with different platforms. Also, there are United States of America rooting gags, but also to understand that there are different forms of characteristics. Also to explain different forms of symbols that are crucial for life or how someone come into the life. To understand different forms of needed female that could be even compared with different forms of animals. And that sounds sort of extremely strange, but sometimes it's correct because the female want production and some want a little bit more production, which of course it's a complex forum, not too easy to understand. Also, different forms of cryptoforms also described as crystal in my book. Also to understand different forms of atoms together with core function, with beauty phase or simple electron forms together with different forms of transformers or catalyzers in electronics. According to science, it's not easy to discover very pure sulfur form, but there are actually also the S plus O2 means SO2 and 2SO2 plus O2 means 2SO3. Those are sulfur dioxide and sulfur trioxide, sometimes also part of simple medicine, to understand different forms of fluorine, but also to understand how this one could be reactive, actually building better paste for some world, but also millions of different tubes that actually are building cosmetics. To understand also copper, zinc and silver is also important if you want to understand medicine materials. There are also some simple silent metals that are only crafted for medicine. If you understand that, you'll also understand some very strange medicine tools. But me would prefer Taoism because it's more simple. In medicine, there is a lot of ethanol and alcohol, especially for building more hygiene, but me think that simple perfumes would actually work as fine as those alcoholic forms. Do not drink it. The drinking probably it's only for people under 29, but they do not know what they are doing. So the drinking alcohol is extreme poison and disease. To understand people that recommend wine or beer, it's extremely difficult and there are no medicine at all. Also, you should understand azure-free polo and that understanding that no information is free in this life. To understand that sometimes you should say no if someone stop you on the street and ask for money. And sometimes you should actually go and share something and build charity, like this beautiful live video on the internet. To build the guards together with picture of Bible, it's also important for those that are building a little bit more picture forms, which sometimes become very, very difficult in meanings or different forms of service symbols together with pricing. For poor or rich, after all, everyone must live somehow. To understand different forms of smells, it's also not easy when it comes to perfume and tangentas. Tariana with T. Tarian is not easy character in my book, described as very odd visual character. To understand different forms of sulfuric acid it's also not important, but to understand the London and thousands of cities around with simple outer me it's not easy. To understand safety in contracts it's not easy, but the process sometimes could take years to build better English, especially to build better English together with psychological forms. To understand the salts, but also together with natural gas of London, it's not easy. But most of time, the gases in life are not extremely useful, and you should actually go apart from them. The natural gases in London are very, very complex, and those are some sort of very complex chemicals. In American states, sulfuric forms in medicine are not as usual as in Europe, but they somehow believe more in calcium sulfate, which is also very, very difficult. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to understand the entire food industry if you don't understand dentistry well. To understand security in dentistry, it's not easy, but in that case, you should actually understand the calcium sulfate also. The calcium sulfate should be silent form and in safety bottle, but it should be also biocompatible with United States materials or European materials. To understand simple forms of simple implants, it's not easy. But to build calcium-rich mileo, it's also not easy. To understand chloride, but also to build and analyze cobalt, it's not easy, especially in United Kingdom, but also in Europe. Sulfate is used in United Kingdom, but also in Europe a lot. There is also sulfur trioxide, which sometimes also include gas, which is some sort of poisonous, so you must give it apart from sulfur trioxide if you are going to build some materials. The sulfuric acid productions are not easy and packed especially for very, very difficult medicine forms, but of course, that's planned to be for rich people. The poor people, of course, can also follow the charity forms and they can see what they could afford if they'll have enough fortune. But sometimes it is also possible to give something to poor people and to build them in better and better cycle or better life actually together with different foods that are possible. If you are in simple dentistry or any medicine form, including legs or hands, you should actually also know the modeling principle of magnesium sulfate, strontium sulfate, the simple book together with borium sulfate and calcium chloride, magnesium sulfate and plaster of Paris. There is also the compounds of glycoside. And if you understand that standard, you'll understand a lot about simple medicine.